Welcome to another journey along the ancient Nile, where the gentle lapping of water against papyrus reeds and the distant call of ibis birds create the perfect backdrop for tonight's restful exploration. I'm your guide through the sands of time, and tonight we'll discover the surprisingly sophisticated world of personal hygiene in ancient Egypt, a civilization that valued cleanliness not just for health, but as a sacred duty to the gods themselves. As you settle into your comfortable position, imagine the warm desert breeze carrying the scent of lotus blossoms and frankincense through the air. The soft crackling of oil lamps provides our gentle illumination as we step back over 3,000 years to walk alongside the people who built the pyramids and worshipped the sun god Ra. Tonight's journey will take us through the daily rituals of cleanliness that defined Egyptian life, from the humble farmer washing in the Nile at dawn to the elaborate bathing ceremonies of pharaohs in their palace chambers. Close your eyes and let the ancient world unfold around you as we explore these timeless human practices that connected the earthly and divine. In ancient Egypt, cleanliness was far more than a matter of personal comfort or social expectation. It was a fundamental aspect of religious life, deeply intertwined with their understanding of purity, health, and spiritual well-being. The Egyptians believed that physical cleanliness was essential for maintaining harmony with the gods and ensuring safe passage into the afterlife. The concept of cleanliness in Egyptian society was rooted in their creation mythology. According to their beliefs, the god Adam emerged from the primordial waters of chaos, clean and pure, to begin the creation of the world. This divine act of emerging clean from water established cleanliness as a sacred principle that all Egyptians, from the lowliest servant to the mightiest pharaoh, were expected to honor in their daily lives. The hieroglyphic symbol for a combination of water ripples and a washing basin appeared frequently in religious texts and tomb inscriptions. This symbol wasn't merely decorative. It represented a fundamental aspect of Egyptian identity and spiritual practice. To be unclean was to be separated from the divine order that governed their universe. Egyptian priests, who served as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, were required to maintain the highest standards of cleanliness. They shaved their entire bodies every few days, removing all hair from their heads, faces, and bodies. This practice wasn't merely aesthetic. It was believed that hair could harbor impurities that would make them unfit to serve the gods. The smooth, hairless appearance of priests in Egyptian art reflects this religious requirement. The daily purification rituals of priests were elaborate affairs that could take several hours to complete. They would begin before dawn, washing themselves multiple times in sacred pools within the temple complexes. These pools were filled with water that had been blessed and purified through religious ceremonies. The priests would use natron, a naturally occurring salt compound, to cleanse their skin and remove any impurities. After their initial washing, priests would anoint themselves with sacred oils and perfumes. These weren't luxury items, but essential tools for maintaining spiritual purity. Different oils were used for different purposes. Frankincense oil for connecting with the divine, myrrh oil for protection against evil spirits, and lotus oil for promoting inner peace and clarity of mind. The clothing worn by priests was also subject to strict cleanliness requirements. Their linen garments had to be washed and purified before each use. Linen was chosen not only for its comfort in the hot Egyptian climate, but also because it was considered the purest of fabrics. The flax plant from which linen was made grew along the Nile, connecting it to the life-giving waters that sustained Egyptian civilization. Even the tools used in religious ceremonies had to be ritually cleansed before each use. Sacred vessels, offering tables, and ceremonial implements were washed with blessed water and fumigated with incense to ensure their purity. This attention to cleanliness extended to every aspect of temple life, creating an environment where the divine presence could be properly honored and maintained. The pharaoh, as the living embodiment of the god Horus, was subject to the most elaborate cleanliness rituals of all. Royal bathing ceremonies were complex affairs involving dozens of servants and lasting several hours. These weren't simply about getting clean. They were religious ceremonies that reinforced the pharaoh's divine nature and connection to the gods. While the cleanliness rituals of priests and pharaohs were elaborate and time-consuming, ordinary Egyptians also maintained surprisingly sophisticated hygiene practices that would be recognizable to us today. The average Egyptian's day began with a ritual washing that served both practical and spiritual purposes. Most Egyptians would wake before dawn, when the air was still cool and the Nile's waters were calm and clear. The river served as the primary bathing facility for the majority of the population, though wealthier families might have private washing areas in their homes. The morning bath wasn't a quick splash. It was a deliberate, methodical process that prepared both body and spirit for the day ahead. Egyptian men and women would wade into the shallow waters near the riverbank, using the gentle current to help rinse away the dust and sweat of the previous day. They would scrub their skin with rough cloths made from woven plant fibers, working systematically from head to toe. The abrasive action of these cloths helped remove dead skin cells and stimulated circulation, leaving the skin clean and invigorated. Soap, as we know it today, didn't exist in ancient Egypt, but the Egyptians had developed effective alternatives. They used a paste made from animal fats mixed with alkaline salts, which created a cleansing agent similar to modern soap. This paste was particularly effective at removing oils and dirt from the skin, and it left behind a subtle, pleasant scent. For those who couldn't afford commercial cleansing pastes, homemade alternatives were common. Crushed beans mixed with animal fat created an effective scrub, while clay from the Nile's banks could be used as a natural cleanser. These improvised solutions were often just as effective as their more expensive counterparts, demonstrating the resourcefulness of ordinary Egyptians in maintaining their cleanliness. Hair care was another important aspect of daily hygiene. Both men and women took great pride in their hair, which was seen as a symbol of vitality and health. Most Egyptians washed their hair every few days using a mixture of water and crushed lotus petals, which left the hair clean and fragrant. The lotus was particularly prized for its pleasant scent and its association with rebirth and renewal. After washing, Egyptians would often apply oils to their hair to protect it from the harsh desert sun and dry climate. Castor oil was particularly popular because it was readily available and effective at moisturizing both hair and scalp. Wealthier individuals might use more exotic oils imported from distant lands, But even the simplest oils provided essential protection against the elements. The practice of hair removal was common among both men and women, though the methods and extent varied by social class and personal preference. Wealthy Egyptians often removed all body hair using bronze razors or tweezers made from precious metals. The process was time-consuming and sometimes painful, but it was considered essential for maintaining proper hygiene and social status. For those who couldn't afford professional hair removal, homemade solutions were available. A paste made from crushed shells mixed with honey could be used to remove unwanted hair, though this method was less comfortable than professional treatments. Some Egyptians simply used sharp flint knives to carefully shave away hair, though this required considerable skill to avoid injury. Dental hygiene was another area where Egyptians showed remarkable sophistication. They understood the connection between oral health and overall well-being, developing various methods for cleaning their teeth and freshening their breath. The most common tooth cleaning method involved chewing on frayed twigs from certain trees, which acted as primitive toothbrushes. The siwak, a twig from the Salvadora persica tree, was particularly prized for dental care. When chewed, the end of the twig would fray into soft bristles that could effectively clean between teeth and along the gum line. The natural compounds in the wood also had antibacterial properties, helping to prevent tooth decay and gum disease. For more thorough cleaning, Egyptians would use a paste made from crushed mint leaves mixed with salt. This combination was effective at removing plaque and food particles while freshening the breath. The mint provided a pleasant taste and natural antibacterial properties, while the salt acted as a mild abrasive to remove stubborn deposits. Wealthier Egyptians might use more elaborate dental care products, including pastes made from powdered pumice stone mixed with wine or honey. These abrasive pastes could remove even the most stubborn stains and deposits, though they had to be used carefully to avoid damaging the tooth enamel. The bathing rituals of Egyptian royalty were elaborate ceremonies that combined practical hygiene with religious significance and political theater. These weren't simple washing sessions, but complex rituals that could last several hours and involve dozens of participants, each with specific roles and responsibilities. The royal bathing chamber was typically located in the most private section of the palace, accessible only to the pharaoh's most trusted servants and advisors. These rooms were architectural marvels, featuring sophisticated drainage systems, heated floors, and elaborate decorations that reflected the divine nature of the pharaoh's person. The walls of royal bathing chambers were often covered with intricate murals depicting scenes from Egyptian mythology, particularly those related to purification and rebirth. Images of the god Khnum, who was believed to have created humans on his potter's wheel, were common, as were depictions of the goddess Isis performing purification rituals. These images weren't merely decorative. They served to reinforce the sacred nature of the bathing ceremony. The bathing process began long before the pharaoh entered the chamber. Servants would spend hours preparing the space, ensuring that every surface was spotlessly clean and that all the necessary implements were properly arranged. The water itself was specially prepared, often transported from sacred springs or blessed by priests before use. The temperature of the bath water was carefully controlled using a sophisticated system of heated stones and metal vessels. Servants would heat large stones in fires and then carefully lower them into the bathwater to achieve the perfect temperature. This process required considerable skill and experience, as the water had to be warm enough to be comfortable, but not so hot as to be dangerous. Once the water was properly prepared, the pharaoh would enter the bathing chamber, accompanied by a small retinue of personal servants. The actual washing process was performed entirely by these servants, as it was considered inappropriate for the divine pharaoh to perform such mundane tasks personally. This wasn't laziness, but a reflection of the pharaoh's elevated status above ordinary human concerns. The servants who performed the royal bathing were specially trained for this purpose and held positions of considerable trust and responsibility. They were typically chosen from among the most skilled and reliable palace staff, and their loyalty was ensured through generous compensation and the honor of serving the divine pharaoh directly. The washing process itself followed a strict sequence that had been established through centuries of tradition. The pharaoh would first be washed with plain water to remove surface dirt and dust. This initial washing was performed using soft cloths made from the finest linen, which had been specially woven for this purpose. After the initial washing, the pharaoh's body would be scrubbed with various cleansing pastes and oils. These products were made from the finest ingredients available, often imported from distant lands at enormous expense. Frankincense from the land of Punt, cedar oil from Lebanon, and precious stones ground into powder were all used in the royal bathing ritual. The application of these cleansing products was itself a carefully choreographed ceremony. Different servants were responsible for different parts of the pharaoh's body, and each had to perform their duties in a specific sequence and manner. The process was so formalized that it was recorded in detail in palace records, ensuring that the ritual could be performed consistently over time. One of the most important aspects of the royal bathing ritual was the application of protective oils and perfumes. These weren't simply cosmetic products, but were believed to have magical properties that would protect the pharaoh from harm and enhance his divine powers. The oils were applied in specific patterns that corresponded to Egyptian religious symbols and beliefs. The final stage of the royal bathing ritual involved the application of cosmetics and jewelry. The pharaoh's eyes would be outlined with kohl, not just for aesthetic reasons, but because the Egyptians believed that kohl had protective properties that could ward off evil spirits and diseases. The kohl was applied using special made from precious metals and decorated with religious symbols. The world of Egyptian cosmetics and perfumes was a sophisticated industry that combined practical benefits with spiritual significance and social status. These products weren't mere luxuries, but essential tools for maintaining health, expressing identity, and connecting with the divine realm that governed Egyptian life. The production of perfumes in ancient Egypt was a complex art that required extensive knowledge of plants, chemistry, and religious symbolism. Master perfumers were highly respected craftsmen who guarded their secrets carefully, passing their knowledge down through generations of apprentices. The most skilled perfumers could create scents that were not only beautiful, but also had specific magical and medicinal properties. The base for most Egyptian perfumes was oil extracted from various plants and animals. Olive oil was common for everyday use, but more exotic oils were preferred for special occasions and religious ceremonies. Castor oil, extracted from the castor bean plant that grew abundantly along the Nile, was particularly prized for its ability to hold scent and its moisturizing properties. The process of creating perfume began with the careful selection and preparation of aromatic materials. Flowers had to be picked at specific times of day when their scent was strongest, usually in the early morning when the dew was still fresh on the petals. The timing was crucial because the concentration of aromatic compounds in flowers changes throughout the day. Egyptian perfumers understood these subtle variations and timed their harvests accordingly to capture the most potent and desirable scents. Resins, such as frankincense and myrrh, were another essential component of Egyptian perfumes. These aromatic substances were harvested from trees that grew in distant lands, making them expensive and highly prized. The resins were transported to Egypt in caravans that crossed vast deserts, adding to their mystique and value. Once they arrived, the resins were carefully sorted and graded. Before being used in perfume production, the extraction of scents from these raw materials was a delicate and time-consuming process. One common method was enfleurage, where flower petals were placed on layers of purified animal fat. The fat would absorb the scent of the flowers over several days, and the process would be repeated with fresh flowers until the fat was fully saturated with fragrance. The resulting scented fat, known as a pomade, could be used as a solid perfume or further processed to extract the pure floral oil. Another extraction method involved steeping aromatic materials in hot oil. The perfumers would heat the oil in large ceramic vessels and then add the flowers, resins, or spices, allowing them to infuse the oil with their fragrance over several hours. The scented oil would then be carefully filtered to remove the solid materials, with each ingredient chosen for its specific properties and symbolic meaning. A perfume designed for a religious ceremony might combine frankincense for its connection to the divine. The perfumer's art lay in their ability to balance these different scents to create a harmonious and powerful fragrance. The finished perfumes were stored in beautiful containers made from alabaster, glass, or precious metals. These containers were not only functional, but also works of art in themselves, often decorated with intricate carvings and inscriptions. The design of the container was considered an important part of the perfume's overall presentation, reflecting the value and sophistication of the product within. Cosmetics were another essential aspect of Egyptian hygiene and beauty culture. Both men and women used a variety of cosmetic products to enhance their appearance, protect their skin from the harsh desert climate, and express their social status and religious beliefs. Kohl, the black eye makeup that is so characteristic of Egyptian art, was perhaps the most important cosmetic product. It was made from galena, a lead sulfide mineral that was ground into a fine powder and mixed with oil or animal fat to create a paste. The kohl was applied around the eyes, using a small stick made from wood, ivory, or bone. The dark outline created by the kohl was believed to protect the eyes from the sun's glare and to ward off eye infections, which were common in the dusty desert environment. In addition to its practical benefits, kohl also had deep religious significance. The Egyptians believed that the eyes were the windows to the soul, and that protecting them with kohl could prevent evil spirits from entering the body. The distinctive almond shape created by the kohl was also believed to mimic the eyes of the falcon god Horus, providing the wearer with divine protection and power. Green eye makeup, made from powdered malachite, was also popular, particularly in the early periods of Egyptian history. Malachite was associated with the goddess Hathor and was believed to have regenerative properties that could promote healing and new life. The green color was also symbolic of the fertile Nile Valley, connecting the wearer to the life-giving power of the river. Lip color was created using red ochre, a natural clay pigment that was ground into a fine powder and mixed with oil or fat. To create a paste, the red color was associated with life and vitality, and wearing it was believed to enhance the wearer's health and energy. The application of lip color was a delicate process that required a steady hand and a small brush to create a precise and even line. Skincare was another important aspect of Egyptian cosmetic practice. The Egyptians understood the importance of protecting their skin from the sun and wind, and they developed a variety of creams and lotions to moisturize and nourish the skin. These products were typically made from a base of animal fat or vegetable oil mixed with various beneficial ingredients such as honey, milk, and plant extracts. Honey was particularly prized for its moisturizing and antibacterial properties. It was often used in face masks and body lotions to soothe irritated skin and promote healing. Milk, particularly donkey's milk, was believed to have anti-aging properties and was used in luxurious baths by wealthy women, including the legendary Cleopatra. Plant extracts were also used in a variety of skincare products. Aloe vera, which grew wild along the Nile, was used to soothe sunburns and other skin irritations. Frankincense and myrrh were used in anti-wrinkle creams, as they were believed to have regenerative properties that could restore youthful elasticity to the skin. The Egyptian focus on personal cleanliness was complemented by a sophisticated understanding of public health and sanitation that was remarkable for its time. The Egyptians recognized that individual health was connected to the health of the community, and that maintaining a clean environment was essential for preventing the spread of disease. One of the most important aspects of Egyptian public health was their management of water resources. The Nile River was the lifeblood of their civilization, providing water for drinking, bathing, and agriculture. However, the Egyptians also understood that the river could be a source of disease if not managed properly to ensure a supply of clean drinking water. The Egyptians developed sophisticated systems for filtering and purifying river water. Wealthy homes often had private wells that tapped into underground water sources, providing a cleaner and more reliable supply of water than the river itself. These wells were carefully constructed to prevent contamination from surface runoff and other sources of pollution. For those who relied on the river for their drinking water, various purification methods were used. One common technique involved letting the river water stand in large ceramic jars for several hours, allowing the sediment and other impurities to settle to the bottom. The clear water would then be carefully decanted from the top, leaving the sediment behind. Another purification method involved filtering the water through porous ceramic filters or layers of sand and gravel. These filters could remove many of the suspended particles and some of the bacteria that caused disease. The Egyptians also understood that boiling water could make it safer to drink, though this was not always practical for large quantities of water. Waste disposal was another important aspect of Egyptian public health. The Egyptians understood that accumulating waste could attract pests and spread disease, and they developed various systems for managing household and community waste. Most households had designated areas for waste disposal, typically located away from the main living quarters. This waste was regularly collected and transported to large pits outside the city or village, where it was either burned or buried. The burning of waste helped to reduce its volume and kill any disease-causing organisms, while burial prevented it from attracting pests and contaminating the environment. Wealthy homes often had more sophisticated waste disposal systems, including private latrines that were connected to underground cesspits. These latrines were typically located in separate rooms or buildings, away from the main living areas, to minimize odors and prevent the spread of disease. The cesspits were regularly emptied by specialized workers who transported the waste to disposal sites outside the city. Public sanitation was also a major concern for Egyptian city planners and administrators. The streets of Egyptian cities were regularly cleaned to remove animal waste and other debris. Drainage systems were constructed to carry away rainwater and prevent flooding, which could create unsanitary conditions and promote the spread of disease. The Egyptians also had a sophisticated understanding of food hygiene. They knew that improperly handled food could cause illness, and they developed various practices to ensure the safety and quality of their food supply. Butchers and other food handlers were required to maintain high standards of cleanliness, and their workplaces were regularly inspected by government officials. The meat was carefully inspected for signs of disease before being sold to the public, and any contaminated meat was immediately destroyed. Food storage was another important aspect of food hygiene. The Egyptians understood that proper storage could prevent food from spoiling and becoming contaminated. Grain was stored in large, well-ventilated granaries that protected it from moisture, and pests, meat, and fish were often salted or dried to preserve them for long periods, while fruits and vegetables were stored in cool, dark cellars. The Egyptians also had a sophisticated medical system that was closely linked to their understanding of hygiene and public health. Egyptian doctors were highly respected professionals who underwent extensive training and were required to adhere to strict ethical codes. Egyptian medical texts, such as the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, reveal a remarkable understanding of anatomy, physiology, and disease. These texts describe a wide range of medical conditions and provide detailed instructions for their diagnosis and treatment. Many of the treatments described in these texts were surprisingly effective, combining practical remedies with magical and religious rituals. Hygiene was a central component of Egyptian medical practice. Doctors understood that clean wounds were less likely to become infected, and they used a variety of antiseptic substances, such as honey and willow bark, to clean wounds and promote healing. They also understood the importance of isolating patients with contagious diseases to prevent them from spreading to the rest of the community. The Egyptian concern with cleanliness and hygiene extended beyond the mortal realm and into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the deceased would need to maintain their purity in the next world to be accepted by the gods and to enjoy eternal life. As a result, they developed elaborate funerary rituals and practices designed to ensure the cleanliness and well-being of the deceased in the afterlife. The most important of these practices was mummification, a complex process of preserving the body that was believed to be essential for the survival of the soul. The Egyptians believed that the soul, or ka, needed a physical body to inhabit in the afterlife, and that this body had to be preserved in a pure and incorruptible state. The mummification process was a highly specialized craft that was performed by skilled embalmers who had extensive knowledge of anatomy, chemistry, and religious ritual. The process began with the removal of the internal organs, which were believed to be the first parts of the body to decay. The brain was removed through the nostrils using a long, hooked instrument, while the other organs were removed through a small incision in the abdomen. The heart was typically left in place, as it was believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion and would be needed by the deceased in the afterlife. After the organs were removed, the body was washed with palm wine and spices to cleanse it and prevent the growth of bacteria. The body cavity was then packed with natron, a naturally occurring salt that would draw out the moisture from the tissues and prevent decay. The body was left to dry in the natron for 40 days, after which it would be completely desiccated and preserved. Once the body was dry, it was washed again and anointed with a variety of fragrant oils and resins. These substances not only helped to preserve the body, but also had symbolic and religious significance. Frankincense and myrrh were used to connect the deceased with the divine realm, while cedar oil was believed to have protective properties that would ward off evil spirits. The body was then carefully wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages. Each layer of bandages was coated with resin to help it adhere to the body and to provide additional protection. Amulets and other magical objects were often placed between the layers of bandages to provide the deceased with specific powers and protections in the afterlife. The final stage of the mummification process was the placement of the mummy in a series of nested coffins and a sarcophagus. These containers were often elaborately decorated with religious texts and images that were designed to guide and protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. The inscriptions on the coffins often included spells from the Book of the Dead, a collection of magical texts that provided the deceased with the knowledge and power they would need to navigate the dangers of the underworld. In addition to the mummification of the body, the Egyptians also took great care to provide the deceased with all the necessary tools and supplies for maintaining their hygiene in the afterlife. Tombs were often filled with a variety of personal hygiene items, including razors, tweezers, combs, and cosmetic palettes. These items were not just symbolic. They were believed to be magically activated in the afterlife, allowing the deceased to continue their daily hygiene routines. Cosmetic jars filled with kohl and other makeup were also common grave goods. The Egyptians believed that the deceased would need to continue to wear makeup in the afterlife to protect themselves from evil spirits and to maintain their social status. The cosmetic palettes found in tombs were often elaborately carved and decorated, reflecting the importance of these items in Egyptian culture. Clean clothing was another essential provision for the afterlife. Tombs were often filled with chests of linen garments, ranging from simple everyday clothing to elaborate ceremonial robes. These garments were carefully folded and packed to ensure that they would be clean and ready for the deceased to wear in the next world. Food and drink were also provided for the deceased, as it was believed that they would need to continue to eat and drink in the afterlife. These offerings typically included bread, beer, wine, and various types of meat and vegetables. The food was often magically consecrated to ensure that it would be eternally fresh and nourishing for the deceased. The tomb itself was considered to be the eternal home of the deceased, and it was designed to be a clean and comfortable environment. The walls of the tomb were often decorated with scenes from the deceased's life, as well as religious texts and images that would provide them with guidance and protection. The floors were often covered with clean sand or plaster, and the air was purified with incense. The Egyptians believed that the deceased would be judged by the gods in the afterlife, and that their purity and cleanliness would be an important factor in this judgment. The Book of the Dead contains a series of spells known as the negative confession, in which the deceased must declare their innocence of various sins and transgressions. Many of these declarations relate to cleanliness and purity, such as "I have not polluted the water, and I have not defiled the sacred places." The judgment of the dead was believed to take place in the Hall of Two Truths, where the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was found to be pure and free from sin, the deceased would be granted eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise where they could enjoy all the pleasures of earthly life without suffering or want. The importance of cleanliness in the afterlife is also reflected in the Egyptian concept of the Ba, one of the components of the soul. The Ba was believed to be able to leave the tomb and travel freely throughout the world, but it needed to return to the mummy each night to be reunited with the Ka. For this reunion to be successful, both the mummy and the tomb had to be kept in a state of perfect cleanliness and purity. The Egyptian calendar was filled with religious festivals and seasonal celebrations that had important implications for hygiene and cleanliness practices. These events provided opportunities for communal purification rituals and reinforced the importance of cleanliness in Egyptian society. The most important of these festivals was the annual flooding of the Nile, known as the inundation. This event, which typically occurred in late summer, was celebrated as a time of renewal and rebirth. The floodwaters brought fertile silt to the fields, ensuring a good harvest. But they also provided an opportunity for large-scale purification. Rituals during the inundation. Entire communities would gather at the riverbank to participate in communal bathing ceremonies. These events were not just practical opportunities to get clean. They were religious rituals that symbolized the washing away of the old year's sins and impurities, and the beginning of a new cycle of life and growth. The priests would lead these ceremonies, blessing the waters, and performing rituals to ensure that the purification would be effective. Participants would wade into the floodwaters and wash themselves thoroughly, often using special soaps and oils that had been blessed for the occasion. The communal nature of these ceremonies reinforced the social bonds within the community and emphasized the shared responsibility for maintaining purity and cleanliness. Another important festival was the Opet festival, which celebrated the annual journey of the god Amun from his temple at Karnak to the temple at Luxor. This festival lasted for several weeks and involved elaborate processions, feasts, and religious ceremonies. Hygiene and cleanliness played a crucial role in the preparations for this festival. In the weeks leading up to the Opet festival, the entire city of Thebes would undergo a massive cleaning effort. Streets were swept and washed, buildings were scrubbed and painted, and the temples were thoroughly purified. The priests would perform elaborate cleansing rituals to ensure that the sacred spaces were worthy of the god's presence. The participants in the festival processions were also required to undergo extensive purification rituals. They would fast for several days before the festival, abstaining from certain foods and activities that were considered impure. They would also bathe multiple times and anoint themselves with sacred oils and perfumes. The festival itself was a spectacular display of Egyptian wealth and piety. The statue of the god Amun, housed in a golden shrine, would be carried through the streets on the shoulders of priests, accompanied by musicians, dancers, and thousands of worshippers. The entire procession would stop at various shrines and temples along the way, where additional purification rituals would be performed. The New Year festival, which coincided with the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, was another important occasion for purification and renewal. This festival marked the beginning of the Egyptian calendar year and was celebrated with elaborate rituals designed to ensure prosperity and good fortune for the coming year. One of the most important aspects of the New Year festival was the ritual cleaning of homes and temples. Families would spend days scrubbing their houses from top to bottom, removing all traces of dust and dirt from the previous year. Old clothing and household items would be discarded or given to the poor, symbolizing the casting off of the old year and the embrace of the new. The temples would also undergo extensive cleaning and purification rituals. The priests would remove all the sacred objects from the temples and clean them thoroughly with blessed water and incense. The walls and floors of the temples would be scrubbed and repainted, and new decorations would be installed to mark the beginning of the new year. Personal purification was also an important part of the New Year celebrations. Individuals would undergo elaborate bathing rituals, often using special soaps and oils that were believed to have magical properties. They would also visit the temples to receive blessings from the priests and to participate in communal purification ceremonies. The festival of Koyak, which honored the god Osiris, was another important occasion for purification rituals. This festival commemorated the death and resurrection of Osiris and was celebrated with elaborate mystery plays and religious ceremonies. The theme of death and rebirth made purification and cleanliness particularly important during this festival. Participants in the Koyak festival would undergo extensive purification rituals, including fasting, bathing, and the wearing of clean white linen garments. The priests would perform elaborate ceremonies to purify the sacred spaces and to ensure that the rituals would be effective in honoring the god and ensuring his continued protection. The festival would culminate in the creation of an Osiris bed, a mummy-shaped container filled with fertile soil and planted with grain. This symbolic representation of the god's body would be watered and tended throughout the festival. and the sprouting grain would symbolize the god's resurrection and the promise of eternal life. The sophisticated hygiene practices of ancient Egypt had a profound and lasting impact on the development of cleanliness and health practices throughout the ancient world and beyond. The Egyptians' understanding of the connection between cleanliness and health, their development of effective cleaning products and techniques, and their integration of hygiene into religious and social life provided a model that would influence civilizations for thousands of years. One of the most significant contributions of Egyptian hygiene practices was their influence on Greek and Roman culture. As trade and cultural exchange between Egypt and the Mediterranean world increased, many Egyptian practices were adopted and adapted by other civilizations. The Greeks, in particular, were impressed by Egyptian medical knowledge and hygiene practices, and many Greek physicians traveled to Egypt to study with Egyptian doctors and priests. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, wrote extensively about Egyptian hygiene practices and their religious significance. He was particularly impressed by the cleanliness of Egyptian priests and the elaborate purification rituals that were performed in the temples. His writings helped to spread knowledge of Egyptian practices throughout the Greek world and contributed to their adoption by other cultures. The Romans were also heavily influenced by Egyptian hygiene practices, particularly in the areas of bathing and cosmetics. The Roman bathhouses, which became such an important part of Roman social life, were directly inspired by Egyptian bathing practices. The Romans adopted many Egyptian techniques for heating water and creating steam, and they also incorporated Egyptian ideas about the social and religious significance of bathing. Roman women were particularly influenced by Egyptian cosmetic practices. The use of kohl to outline the eyes, which had been a distinctive feature of Egyptian culture for thousands of years, became popular among wealthy Roman women. They also adopted Egyptian techniques for creating perfumes and other cosmetic products, and many Roman cosmetic recipes were directly derived from Egyptian sources. The influence of Egyptian hygiene practices can also be seen in the development of early Christian monasticism. The monastic emphasis on cleanliness, simple living, and regular bathing can be traced directly to Egyptian religious practices. The Islamic conquest of Egypt in the 7th century CE led to another wave of cultural exchange and the spread of Egyptian hygiene practices. Islamic scholars were impressed by the sophistication of Egyptian medical and hygiene knowledge, and they translated many Egyptian texts into Arabic. These translations helped to preserve Egyptian knowledge and spread it throughout the Islamic world. The Islamic emphasis on cleanliness and purification, which is such an important part of Islamic religious practice, was also influenced by Egyptian traditions. The Islamic practice of ritual washing before prayer, the emphasis on personal cleanliness, and the development of sophisticated bathing facilities in Islamic cities all show the influence of Egyptian hygiene practices. The rediscovery of Egyptian knowledge during the Renaissance led to another revival of interest in Egyptian hygiene practices. European scholars who studied Egyptian texts were impressed by the sophistication of Egyptian medical and hygiene knowledge, and they began to incorporate Egyptian ideas into their own practices. The development of modern chemistry and medicine in the 18th and 19th centuries led to a new appreciation for the scientific basis of many Egyptian hygiene practices. Modern analysis of Egyptian cosmetic and medical products has revealed that many of them were remarkably effective and were based on sound scientific principles, which has shown that the lead compounds in kohl have antibacterial properties that can help prevent eye infections. Similarly, which have shown that honey has powerful antibacterial and healing properties. The Egyptian understanding of the importance of clean water and proper waste disposal has also been validated by modern public health research. The Egyptian practices of filtering and purifying water, managing waste disposal, and maintaining clean living environments were remarkably advanced for their time and provided a foundation for modern public health practices. Today, as we face new challenges in global health and hygiene, we can still learn from the Egyptian example. Their holistic approach to hygiene, which integrated physical, spiritual, and social aspects of cleanliness, provides a model for addressing the complex health challenges of the modern world. The Egyptian emphasis on community responsibility for public health, their understanding of the connection between individual and collective well-being, and their integration of hygiene practices into daily life, all offer valuable lessons for contemporary public health efforts. As we conclude our journey through the world of ancient Egyptian hygiene, we can appreciate the remarkable sophistication and wisdom of this ancient civilization. Their practices were not just about getting clean. They were about maintaining harmony with the divine order, expressing social identity, and ensuring the health and well-being of both individuals and communities. The gentle lapping of the Nile continues to echo through time, carrying with it the wisdom of a people who understood that cleanliness was not just a practical necessity, but a sacred duty. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine yourself joining those ancient Egyptians at the river's edge, participating in the timeless ritual of purification that connected them to their gods, their community, and their eternal destiny. The soft sound of water against the reeds, the distant call of night birds, and the gentle breeze carrying the scent of lotus blossoms all remind us that some things are truly timeless. The human desire for cleanliness, health, and spiritual purity transcends the boundaries of time and culture, connecting us to our ancient ancestors and to the eternal rhythms of life itself. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of this ancient tradition, this timeless quest for purity and renewal that has guided humanity for thousands of years. Let the wisdom of ancient Egypt wash over you like the gentle waters of the Nile, cleansing away the cares of the day and preparing you for the peaceful rest that awaits. While the fundamental principles of cleanliness and hygiene were consistent throughout ancient Egypt, there were significant regional variations in how these practices were implemented and understood. The vast expanse of the Egyptian kingdom, stretching from the Mediterranean coast in the north to the cataracts of the Nile in the south, encompassed diverse climates, cultures, and resources that influenced local hygiene customs. In Lower Egypt, the northern region of the kingdom that included the Nile Delta, the abundance of water from the river's many branches created unique opportunities and challenges for hygiene practices. The marshy environment of the delta provided an abundance of aquatic plants that were used in various cleansing preparations. Papyrus, which grew prolifically in the delta marshes, was not only used for writing, but also processed into fibers for washing cloths and scrubbing implements. The coastal regions of Lower Egypt had access to sea salt, which was highly prized for its purifying properties. This salt was used in various cleansing preparations and was believed to have special powers for removing spiritual impurities. The proximity to the Mediterranean also brought contact with foreign traders and their hygiene practices, leading to the adoption of new techniques and products. The people of Lower Egypt developed sophisticated methods for dealing with the high humidity and frequent flooding that characterized their region. They built elevated bathing platforms that could remain dry even during the annual inundation, and they developed special techniques for preserving soaps and oils in the humid climate. In contrast, Upper Egypt, the southern region of the kingdom, faced the challenges of a more arid climate and greater distance from the sea. The people of this region became experts at conserving water and developing hygiene practices that required minimal water usage. They perfected the art of dry cleaning using sand and various abrasive materials, and they developed concentrated cleansing preparations that could be effective with small amounts of water. The quarries and mines of Upper Egypt provided access to unique minerals that were used in hygiene practices. Natron, the salt compound that was so important in mummification, was primarily mined in the desert regions of Upper Egypt. The people of this region developed specialized knowledge about the different types and qualities of natron and their various uses in cleansing and preservation. The Nubian regions at the southern border of Egypt had their own distinctive hygiene traditions that blended Egyptian practices with local customs. The Nubians were renowned for their skill in working with gold and precious stones, and they incorporated these materials into their hygiene implements and cosmetic containers. Nubian women were particularly famous for their elaborate hairstyles and their use of exotic oils and perfumes. The oasis communities, scattered throughout the Egyptian deserts, developed unique hygiene practices adapted to their isolated environments. These communities had to be completely self-sufficient, developing their own sources of water, soap, and cosmetic materials. They became experts at identifying and utilizing the medicinal and cleansing properties of desert plants and minerals. The oasis dwellers developed sophisticated water management systems that allowed them to maintain high standards of cleanliness. Despite the scarcity of water in their environment, they built elaborate underground cisterns and channels that collected and stored rainwater and spring water, and they developed strict protocols for the use and conservation of this precious resource. Each oasis community also developed its own distinctive cosmetic traditions, often based on the unique plants and minerals available in their local environment. Some oases were famous for particular types of healing clays, while others were known for rare plants that produced exceptional oils or dyes. The border regions of Egypt, where the kingdom met neighboring civilizations, were areas of cultural exchange that influenced hygiene practices. The eastern border with the Levant brought contact with Mesopotamian and Canaanite hygiene traditions, while the western border with Libya introduced Egyptian practices to nomadic desert peoples. These border regions often served as testing grounds for new hygiene products and techniques. Traders and diplomats would bring foreign products and ideas, which would be evaluated and potentially incorporated into Egyptian practices. This constant Exchange of ideas helped to keep Egyptian hygiene practices dynamic and innovative. The military garrisons stationed along Egypt's borders also developed their own hygiene, traditions adapted to the demands of military life. Soldiers needed to maintain cleanliness and health while on campaign, often in harsh and challenging environments. They developed portable hygiene kits and field-expedient cleaning methods that could be used when traditional facilities were not available. The sophisticated hygiene practices of ancient Egypt were supported by a complex economic system that produced, distributed, and regulated the various products and services related to cleanliness and personal care. This industry employed thousands of people and generated significant wealth for the Egyptian economy. The production of soap and cleansing agents was one of the most important sectors of the hygiene economy. Soap makers were skilled craftsmen who guarded their recipes carefully and passed their knowledge down through family lines. The basic ingredients for soap production, animal fats and alkaline salts, were readily available in Egypt, but the skill required to combine them properly and create effective cleansing agents made soap makers valuable members of society. The soap-making process began with the collection and preparation of raw materials. Animal fats were obtained from butchers and rendered down to remove impurities. The quality of the fat was crucial to the quality of the final product, and soap makers developed sophisticated methods for evaluating and grading different types of fat. Alkaline salts were obtained from various sources, including the ash of certain plants and natural salt deposits found in the desert. Different types of salts produced different qualities of soap, and experienced soap makers knew exactly which salts to use for different purposes. Some salts produced a hard, long-lasting soap that was ideal for heavy-duty cleaning, while others created a softer, more gentle soap that was suitable for delicate skin. The soap-making process itself was a carefully controlled operation that required precise timing and temperature control. The fats and salts had to be heated to exactly the right temperature and mixed in the proper proportions to create a chemical reaction that would produce soap. Too much heat would burn the mixture, while too little would prevent the reaction from occurring properly. Once the soap was made, it had to be aged for several weeks to allow the chemical reaction to complete and to develop the proper texture and scent. During this aging process, the soap would be regularly turned and inspected to ensure that it was developing properly. The final product would be tested for quality and effectiveness before being sold to customers. The perfume industry was another major component of the hygiene economy. Perfume makers were among the most highly skilled and respected craftsmen in Egyptian society, and their products were in high demand, both domestically and for export. The production of perfume required extensive knowledge of plants, chemistry, and distillation techniques, as well as access to rare and expensive raw materials. The raw materials for perfume production came from all over the known world. Frankincense and myrrh were imported from the land of Punt, located somewhere along the Red Sea coast. Cedar oil came from the forests of Lebanon, while various spices and aromatic plants were obtained from India and other distant lands. The cost of these materials was enormous, making perfume a luxury product that was affordable only to the wealthy. The perfume-making process was complex and time-consuming, often taking months to complete a single batch of high-quality perfume. The aromatic materials had to be carefully processed to extract their essential oils, and these oils had to be blended in precise proportions to create the desired scent. The final product was then aged to allow the different components to blend and mature. The cosmetics industry was closely related to the perfume industry and often involved the same craftsmen and suppliers. The production of kohl, rouge, and other cosmetic products required access to specific minerals and pigments, as well as the knowledge and skill to process them properly. Kohl production, for example, required galena, a lead sulfide mineral that had to be carefully ground into an extremely fine powder. The grinding process was labor-intensive and required specialized equipment and techniques. The quality of the final product depended on the fineness of the powder and the purity of the original mineral. The distribution of hygiene products throughout Egypt was handled by a network of merchants and traders who specialized in these goods. These merchants would travel throughout the kingdom, buying products from manufacturers and selling them to retailers and individual customers. The most successful merchants developed extensive networks of suppliers and customers and could command high prices for rare or high-quality products. The regulation of the hygiene industry was handled by government officials who were responsible for ensuring the quality and safety of products sold to the public. These officials would regularly inspect manufacturing facilities and test products to ensure that they met established standards. Merchants who sold substandard or adulterated products could face severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment. The government also regulated the prices of essential hygiene products to ensure that they remained affordable to ordinary citizens. Basic soap and cleansing agents were considered necessities, and the government would intervene in the market if prices became too high. Luxury products like perfumes and cosmetics were not subject to price controls and could command very high prices. The hygiene industry also provided employment for thousands of people in various supporting roles. Water carriers were responsible for transporting clean water to homes and businesses. Laundry workers specialized in cleaning and maintaining clothing and linens. Barbers and cosmeticians provided personal grooming services to those who could afford them. The economic importance of the hygiene industry extended beyond Egypt's borders. Egyptian hygiene products were highly prized throughout the ancient world and were major export commodities. Egyptian perfumes, cosmetics, and soaps were traded as far away as Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, bringing significant wealth into the Egyptian economy. The reputation of Egyptian hygiene products was so high that they often commanded premium prices in foreign markets. Wealthy individuals throughout the ancient world would pay enormous sums for authentic Egyptian perfumes and cosmetics, viewing them as symbols of sophistication and luxury. In ancient Egyptian society, hygiene practices served as powerful indicators of social status, wealth, and cultural sophistication. The quality and elaborateness of one's cleanliness rituals, the products used, and the time devoted to personal care all communicated important information about an individual's place in the social hierarchy. At the apex of Egyptian society, the pharaoh and royal family maintained hygiene standards that were not just about cleanliness, but about demonstrating their divine nature and absolute power. The royal bathing rituals we discussed earlier were as much about political theater as they were about personal hygiene. Every aspect of the pharaoh's cleanliness routine was designed to reinforce their status as living gods who were above the concerns of ordinary mortals. The products used in royal hygiene rituals were the finest available, often imported at enormous expense from distant lands. The pharaoh's soaps might contain frankincense from Punt, cedar oil from Lebanon, and precious stones ground into powder. These exotic ingredients were not just effective cleansing agents, they were symbols of the pharaoh's ability to command resources from across the known world. The royal cosmetic collection was equally impressive, featuring kohl made from the finest galena rouge created from rare red ochre, and perfumes blended from dozens of different aromatic ingredients. The containers for these products were works of art in themselves, crafted from gold, silver, and precious stones by the kingdom's most skilled artisans. The nobility and high-ranking officials of the Egyptian court also maintained elaborate hygiene routines, though not quite as extravagant as those of the royal family. These individuals had access to high-quality products and could afford to employ personal servants to assist with their daily cleansing rituals. Their homes often featured private bathing chambers with sophisticated plumbing and drainage systems. Noble families would often compete with each other in the elaborateness of their hygiene practices, using their cleanliness routines as a way to display their wealth and sophistication. A noble's cosmetic collection might include dozens of different products, each stored in beautifully decorated containers that demonstrated the owner's refined taste and substantial resources. The priestly class occupied a unique position in Egyptian society when it came to hygiene practices. While priests might not have had the same material wealth as the nobility, their religious duties required them to maintain the highest standards of ritual purity. This gave them access to the finest cleansing products and techniques, and their expertise in purification rituals made them respected authorities on hygiene practices. Priests often served as advisors to wealthy families on matters of cleanliness and health, and their recommendations carried significant weight in Egyptian society. The association between priestly authority and hygiene expertise helped to reinforce the religious significance of cleanliness in Egyptian culture. The merchant class, which grew in importance as Egypt's trade networks expanded, used hygiene practices as a way to demonstrate their growing wealth and social aspirations. Successful merchants would invest heavily in personal grooming and cleanliness, often adopting practices that had previously been reserved for the nobility. Merchant families would often employ professional cosmeticians and barbers to maintain their appearance, and they would spare no expense in acquiring the finest hygiene products available. Their homes might feature elaborate bathing facilities that rivaled those of noble families, and they would often host social gatherings where guests could admire their sophisticated hygiene. Arrangements. The growing wealth of the merchant class also led to innovations in hygiene products and techniques. Merchants who traveled extensively would encounter foreign hygiene practices and products, which they would bring back to Egypt and adapt to local tastes and preferences. This constant influx of new ideas helped to keep Egyptian hygiene practices dynamic and evolving. Skilled craftsmen and artisans occupied a middle position in Egyptian society, and their hygiene practices reflected their intermediate status. While they might not have been able to afford the most expensive products and services, they took pride in maintaining clean and well-groomed appearances that reflected their professional skills and social respectability. Many craftsmen specialized in producing hygiene-related products, which gave them access to high-quality materials and techniques. A skilled perfume maker, for example, might not have been wealthy enough to afford the most expensive imported ingredients, but their professional knowledge allowed them to create effective and pleasant products using more affordable local materials. The working class and peasant farmers, who made up the majority of Egypt's population, had more limited resources for hygiene practices, but they still maintained standards of cleanliness that were remarkable for their time. Even the poorest Egyptians understood the importance of regular bathing and basic grooming, and they developed ingenious ways to maintain their cleanliness despite their limited resources. Rural communities often shared bathing facilities and hygiene resources, creating a sense of communal responsibility for cleanliness and health. Village elders would organize regular cleaning days when the entire community would work together to maintain public hygiene standards and ensure that everyone had access to clean water and basic cleansing materials. The seasonal nature of agricultural work also influenced hygiene practices among the working class. During the busy harvest season, when long hours in the fields made regular bathing difficult, workers would develop special techniques for maintaining cleanliness despite their demanding schedules. They might use dry cleaning methods with sand and rough cloths, or they might take advantage of brief breaks to quickly wash in irrigation channels. Even slaves, who occupied the lowest position in Egyptian society, were expected to maintain basic standards of cleanliness. Slave owners understood that clean, healthy slaves were more productive and valuable, so they provided basic hygiene facilities and products. However, the quality and quantity of these provisions were minimal compared to what was available to free citizens. The social significance of hygiene practices extended beyond individual status to family and community reputation. A family's hygiene standards reflected not just their wealth, but also their moral character and cultural sophistication. Families that maintained high standards of cleanliness were respected and admired, while those that neglected hygiene were looked down upon and socially ostracized. This social pressure to maintain cleanliness standards helped to ensure that hygiene practices were widely adopted throughout Egyptian society. Even those who might have been inclined to neglect their personal care were motivated to maintain basic standards by the fear of social disapproval and exclusion. As our journey through the world of ancient Egyptian hygiene draws to a close, we find ourselves contemplating the deeper meanings and lasting significance of these ancient practices. The Egyptians understood something profound about the nature of cleanliness that extends far beyond the simple removal of dirt and impurities. For them, hygiene was part of an eternal cycle of renewal that connected the physical and spiritual realms, the individual and the community, the mortal and the divine. This cycle of renewal was most clearly expressed in the daily rhythm of Egyptian life. Each morning, as the sun god Ra began his journey across the sky, Egyptians would begin their own daily journey of purification and renewal. The morning bath was not just a practical necessity, but a symbolic rebirth, a washing away of the nights impurities, and a preparation for the day's challenges and opportunities. The water of the Nile, which was central to all Egyptian hygiene practices, was itself a symbol of this eternal cycle. The river's annual flood brought new life to the land, depositing fertile silt that would nourish the crops and sustain the people. In the same way, the daily use of water for cleansing brought new life to the body and spirit, washing away the accumulated impurities of daily existence and restoring the individual to a pure state of purity and harmony. The Egyptians understood that this cycle of renewal was not just an individual process, but a communal one as well. The health and purity of the community depended on the cleanliness and moral character of its individual members. When people neglected their hygiene or failed to maintain proper standards of purity, it affected not just themselves, but their families, their neighbors, and ultimately the entire kingdom. This understanding led to the development of sophisticated systems of public health and sanitation that were designed to support and maintain the cleanliness of the entire community. The Egyptians recognized that individual hygiene practices, no matter how elaborate or effective, could not succeed in isolation. They needed to be supported by clean water supplies, effective waste disposal systems, and community-wide standards of cleanliness and health. The religious dimension of Egyptian hygiene practices also reflected this understanding of renewal and regeneration. The gods themselves were believed to undergo daily cycles of death and rebirth, and human hygiene practices were seen as a way of participating in these divine rhythms. By maintaining their purity and cleanliness, Egyptians were not just caring for their physical bodies, but also nurturing their spiritual connection to the divine realm. The elaborate purification rituals performed by priests and pharaohs were designed to ensure that these important figures remained worthy vessels for divine power and wisdom. Their cleanliness was not just a personal matter, but a sacred responsibility that affected the well-being of the entire kingdom. If the pharaoh or the priests became impure, it could disrupt the cosmic order and bring disaster upon the land. The Egyptian understanding of hygiene as a form of renewal also extended to their conception of the afterlife. The mummification process, with its elaborate cleansing and purification rituals, was designed to prepare the deceased for a new form of existence in the next world. The body had to be made pure and incorruptible so that it could serve as a suitable vessel for the soul's continued journey. The grave goods that were buried with the deceased, including the various hygiene implements and cosmetic products we discussed earlier, were not just practical items for use in the afterlife. They were symbols of the eternal nature of the renewal process, representing the belief that the cycle of purification and regeneration would continue even beyond death. This conception of hygiene as an eternal cycle of renewal has profound implications for how we understand the role of cleanliness in human life. The Egyptians recognized that hygiene was not just about maintaining physical health, but about participating in the fundamental processes of life itself. Cleanliness was a way of aligning oneself with the natural rhythms of renewal and regeneration that govern all existence. In our modern world, we have largely lost this deeper understanding of hygiene and cleanliness. We tend to view these practices in purely practical terms, as necessary but mundane activities that we perform to maintain our health and social acceptability. We have forgotten the profound spiritual and taxological dimensions of cleanliness that the Egyptians understood so well. Yet there is much that we can learn from the Egyptian example. Their holistic approach to hygiene, which integrated physical, spiritual, and social dimensions of cleanliness, offers valuable insights for addressing the complex health challenges of our own time. Their understanding of the connection between individual and community health, their recognition of the importance of clean environments and public sanitation, and their appreciation for the psychological and spiritual benefits of cleanliness all have relevance for contemporary life. Perhaps most importantly, the Egyptian understanding of hygiene as a form of renewal reminds us that these practices can be more than just routine maintenance activities. They can be opportunities for reflection, meditation, and spiritual growth. The simple act of washing can become a moment of mindfulness, a chance to let go of the stresses and impurities of daily life and to prepare ourselves for new challenges and opportunities. As we conclude our exploration of ancient Egyptian hygiene practices, we can appreciate the remarkable wisdom and sophistication of this ancient civilization. Their practices were not just about getting clean. They were about participating in the eternal rhythms of life, death, and renewal that govern all existence. They understood that cleanliness was not just a physical state, but a spiritual condition that connected them to the divine order of the universe. The gentle sound of water flowing over stones, the soft whisper of wind through papyrus reeds, and the distant call of birds along the Nile all remind us of the timeless nature of these ancient practices. The human need for cleanliness, renewal, and spiritual purification transcends the boundaries of time and culture, connecting us to our ancient ancestors and to the eternal rhythms of life itself. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine yourself standing on the banks of the ancient Nile, participating in the timeless ritual of purification that connected the Egyptians to their gods, their community, and their eternal destiny. Let the wisdom of this ancient civilization wash over you like the gentle waters of the river, cleansing away the cares and impurities of the day and preparing you for the peaceful renewal that comes with sleep. The cycle of renewal continues, as it has for thousands of years, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings, fresh starts, and the eternal possibility of transformation and growth. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of this ancient tradition, this timeless quest for purity and renewal that has guided humanity since the dawn of civilization.